How's it going? This is the Understand Pharmacodynamics Better series, and this particular video is going to be on agonists, partial agonists, antagonists, and I'm going to go into how receptors work. And I think this series might have a little bit more biochemistry and a little bit more pharmacology, so it might be a little bit more abstract in terms of directly understanding clinical things, but as always, I'm going to focus on things that I think change how you're going to think clinically. So to first get started, let's go over what happens when a drug binds a receptor. And I think what happens when a drug binds a receptor is a little bit more complicated than most people appreciate. So the drug fits into a pocket of the receptor and creates what's called a conformational change. And a conformational change is, the way I like to think of it, is it changes the shape of the receptor in such a way that the receptor creates effects downstream because of the difference in the shape. And then these downstream effects occur by way of what's called secondary messengers. And there are a few different types of secondary messenger systems, but the general principle of all of them is that an agonist or drug or ligand binds and creates a conformational change in a G protein link receptor, and then this creates a secondary messenger, and then downstream proteins are phosphorylated, and then this phosphorylation changes intracellular processes. And I'm sure that was about as clear as mud, so I'm going to go over a specific secondary messenger system, which is the CAMP secondary messenger system. And even if this is super confusing, you don't understand any of it, just hold tight, because it's not that, the specifics of these things aren't that important. So for the CAMP system, receptors bound, the G protein becomes active. This activates adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase converts AMP to cyclic AMP, which is CAMP. CAMP is a secondary messenger. And then CAMP activates downstream effector enzymes. The main one typically is protein kinase A. And then protein kinase A phosphorylates numerous enzymes. And if you're a smart cookie, you'll say, yo, dude, you didn't tell us anything about how receptors work. You just replaced the concept of receptor with an even more confusing and vague concept of protein kinase A. One rule that I want PsychoFarm to follow is to never explain a confusing concept with a tangentially related, equally confusing concept. To me, this is just hand waving, and I hate when people do this. So the answer as to how this secondary messenger system affects change in a cell is that it depends on the cell type. So basically what happens is the production of protein kinase A, or one of the enzymes that phosphorylates other enzymes, they phosphorylate different enzymes depending on the cell type that's present. So an example is that, for example, in cardiac myocytes, this secondary messenger system will eventually sequester calcium by phosphorylating an enzyme that is responsible for that. Whereas in the nervous system, it'll activate the reward system because the protein kinase A will phosphorylate the potassium channel, which will result in less calcium coming in to the neuron, so it releases less neurotransmitters. Or an example is that in adipocytes, it will enhance lipolysis because it'll stimulate the enzymes, it'll phosphorylate the enzymes involved in lipolysis, so it'll stimulate lipase. So essentially what occurs is that by turning on enzymes, depending on the cell type, it'll have a direct effect in the cell via those enzymes. So it can open ion channels, it can create messengers that will go into the nucleus and impact gene regulation, and ultimately will have a change in the cellular processes. So I'm aware that that was pretty confusing and that there was a lot of biochemistry in that. And the thing is, I don't think you need to know the specifics of what happens downstream. Memorizing everything that occurs in these pathways is rarely, if ever, helpful in terms of clinical medicine. So I think it's totally fine if you keep this as kind of a black box in your brain and you say, receptor binds and an effect occurs. But I think you should be aware of the general mechanics. And from time to time, take a look at what goes on underneath the black box, like when you watch videos like this. So from here on out, to make this concept a little bit easier, I'm going to turn this entire process into a black box, and the outcome of that black box is going to be a light bulb. But the thing I want you to take away is that a drug binds a receptor, and then there's biochemical changes, and then these biochemical changes influence the cell, and then these cellular changes influences the organ, which influences the clinical picture.